strengthen private sector partnerships and civil society response to rapid authoritarian transitions, military takeovers, and political instability on day 3 of RightsCon. My name is Richard Gaines, and I'm the Senior Human Rights Advocacy Manager at the Wikimedia Foundation, where we work towards a world in which every single human being can freely share in the sum of all knowledge. I'm excited to be joined today by a distinguished group of panelists representing both civil society and the private sector. The topics of authoritarian transitions, military takeovers, and political instability are unfortunately on all of our minds as we watch the military invasion of Ukraine in horror. Friday marked the 100th day since the Russian invasion of Ukraine began. Since then, the world has seen an unprecedented mobilization of the private sector and joining a global sanctions regime in response to the aggression. Countless international companies have withdrawn from Russia or stopped doing business with Russian entities, underscoring a global rejection of Russia's military invasion and a growing responsibility among businesses to respond ethically to such events. Similarly, civil society and humanitarian aid organizations mobilize quickly to document human rights abuses, advocate for the rights of victims, and to provide basic necessities to help civilians displaced by the invasion. Yet, these challenges are not unique to the armed conflict in Ukraine. In Myanmar, the military junta has crushed civil society and political dissent through a brutal crackdown that has gutted freedom of expression, association, and privacy, among other human rights. This has occurred both online and offline, beginning in early 2021. In Ethiopia, the Tigray region is experiencing the world's second longest internet shutdown. For more than 580 days, the public there has been in the dark as authorities censor and control the flow of information amid an ongoing armed conflict, making it difficult for journalists and human rights groups to document and raise awareness about human rights violations against civilians. Our panel today will discuss how the private sector and civil society can strengthen their partnerships in response to these challenges now and in the future. Before I introduce our distinguished panelists, I'd like to invite our audience to please share their questions in the chat as we move through this conversation. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Anastasia Zermont, campaigner for Eastern Europe and Central Asia for Access Now, as well as Kristen Flynn Goodwin, General Manager of the Digital Security Unit at Microsoft, and Mike Hull, President at Siphon. Anastasia, I'll pose the first question to you to set the stage. What are the challenges that civil society has been facing in staying connected and safe on platforms, especially during times of authoritarian transitions and political instability? Specifically, when talking about this situation, Russia, Ukraine, and even Belarus come to mind as recent examples.
Yeah, sure. And actually answering your question, let me bring the example of Belarus, because while international community's attention has shifted towards Ukraine and Russia, the crackdown on civil society in Belarus is happening both offline and online. As of today, 1,221 persons are recognized in Belarus as political prisoners. And since 2022's presidential election, 750 NGOs have been liquidated, either by the government or following the pressure of the government. Their websites are blocked, same as websites of almost all independent media outlets in Belarus, and in general, expressing critical views and opinions on the governmental policies or actions, same as actions of governmental officials, online can lead to disproportionate punishments. One of the most striking examples, at least for me, was when in Belarus, one woman was sentenced to 2 years of limitation of freedom for posting, as was defined by court, an insulting comment in a form of emoji. So just an emoji, and you are sentenced to 2 years in prison. Of course, the situation creates the risk of self-censorship, and many independent media outlets in Belarus decided to disable their commentary sections on their website, because as they told the audience, it is impossible today to define what can be considered as extremism online. Speaking of other risks that users face while staying online, I should say that along with general cyber threats and privacy concerns, there are risks that are very specific to authoritarian regimes and not only to Belarus. Like I mentioned before, vague anti-extremism regulations and laws bans not only civil society and independent media, but they actually subject users to very disproportionate sanctions and disproportionate punishments. While we even sharing, likes, commenting can lead to a criminal offense. And why we need to keep such a close eye on this situation is because the crisis can escalate pretty quickly. Let's just look on Russia. We considered that the situation in Russia is pretty concerning before February. But right now, when Meta is recognized as extremism organization in Russia, when Facebook and Instagram are banned, when Twitter is blocked and TikTok decided to cease live streaming and other functions because of the fear of persecution, when most of the VPNs are still available, but each day the list of banned ones is growing, this is a clear example how we downsliding from bad to worse.
Thank you for your thoughts. From your point of view, what are some gaps that platforms can fill to keep civil society connected and safe on their platforms in the face of all of these different threats where governments are using technical means as well as legal means, like you mentioned, terrorism laws to stifle dissent?
Well, first of all, let's agree on this. Let's keep civil society connected and do not disconnect Russian and Belarusian users, so keep your services available to them. As you may know, Access Now and coalition of civil society organizations warned allied governments against counterproductive sanctions that would further isolate Russian users and Belarusian users from the free flow of information. And we are pleased to see that last month, for example, UK government responded to this warning by taking action to ensure that people in Russia and in Belarus, we hope, retain access to the global internet and that social media and news media services can still operate inside the countries. The similar approach was actually taken by Biden administration, who recently issued General License 25, excluding services, software, hardware, and technologies that enable exchange of communication online from the sanction lists. But sometimes companies are acting on their own following the external pressure, I guess, and many cloud services, CRMs, even Slack, became unavailable to Russian users. Even tech donation programs through TechSoup, for example, have been suspended. You must understand that while Visa, MasterCard, and PayPal have left Russia, it is almost impossible for NGOs and independent media outlets to receive donations, to continue their work, and to use VPNs as well. So this is the first thing. And the second thing is perhaps to boost the security of users online. Such initiatives like log profile initiative, Meta, for example, when you can hide your followers and the list of friends is extremely helpful. The disappearing messaging feature on WhatsApp recently introduced is a good practice too. Perhaps platforms can also give a hand to civil society with fighting disinformation and propaganda by clearly marking state-owned and controlled accounts, for example, so users can clearly distinguish between independent and not so independent information online. But at the same time, yes, of course, we need to secure accounts of independent journalists, not to ban them and not to remove content produced by them.
Kristen, I'd like to turn it over to you. How is Microsoft managing its policies and businesses in repressive contexts like we're talking about? How does it ensure that civil society is able to stay connected to its services and that users at risk can stay safe on its platforms?
Thank you for that question. So one of the things that I do at Microsoft is my team and I specialize in studying nation state attack activity. So we specifically spend a lot of time looking at how Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea attack their victims. Who are their victims? What are they going after and why? And what we learn from a lot of that is that so much of what governments are going after, setting aside the war in Ukraine, which is a horrific thing from a human rights perspective and an anomaly from a data perspective, almost 90% of attacks that we see are not against traditional critical infrastructures. Nation states are largely engaging in intelligence collection operations. They seek information, and typically they collect it from think tanks, NGOs, IGOs, and the media. And one of the things that's interesting is that civil society is right in that space. Right? At times it functions like media, sharing information out. At times it's a think tank, even working with the government or other partners to explore new policies or developments, and definitely functioning like an NGO or an IGO. And so it's important to think about the fact that as a community, you are absolutely in the crosshairs of major nation states that seek to know information that you have and how you're going to use it. We also see these targeting activities coming from cyber mercenaries, companies like NSO Group. Last year, we did a disruption against a private sector actor that we called Sourgum, Citizen Lab calls Kangaroo. And we saw them going after human rights advocates, journalists, politicians, and others in Spain and in other countries around Europe. And when we saw that those attacks were happening, we saw that our infrastructure was being used as a part of those attacks. We did one of the most fun things you can do as an attorney at Microsoft. We blew it up. We found the infrastructure, the accounts, the malware that were being used, and we eradicated it. And that is a fantastic feeling when you know that you can have an immediate effect on an attack or a campaign like that. On the private sector, offensive actor, the mercenary side, much of the intelligence collection focuses on phones, devices, tracking locations and collecting information, a la NSO Group. And so those are as Windows Phone did not rocket around the world in ways that we had hoped, our ability to impact issues at the device level is harder. But we partner with groups that are tracking those activities, and when there are indicators of compromise that we can go and do something about, we absolutely do that. Not only is it the right thing to do, because of the cloud and cloud technologies, it enables us to be able to then push those protections out at scale. Because if a nation state or a cyber mercenary is using those tactics against civil society, they work against other groups. And so our interest, as fast as possible, is to get them into the cloud and then deploy them globally. That's a really important distinction. If you are on premises, if you've got your own infrastructure and you're running your own backend servers and your own capabilities, generally that's going to be hand-to-hand combat against a nation state actor. The beauty of being here at Microsoft and partnering with the Microsoft Threat Intelligence Center is that we've got teams that do nothing but track nation state attackers. When there's a nation state actor that we track that is targeted or identified or compromised a customer of ours, either on the consumer side or on the enterprise side, then we're going to notify them. And that gives us the ability to make sure that we're making people aware as fast as possible of the attack activity. And through programs like Account Guard, we can work with human rights organizations and inside civil society so that personal accounts, we can't protect Gmail accounts or third parties, but Hotmail or Outlook.com addresses, we can help partner with the victim and with the organization to help share more context about what happened and prevent the effects of those attacks from hitting others. This is a really, really important area because nation states are so aggressive in the intelligence collection operation space. They don't care what platform you're on. They don't care what technology you're using because they've been tasked by their government to go collect information, and they're going to go find a way to fulfill that mission. And so that context is really what drives us to work hard to think about how do we come up with protections at scale and get them out as fast as possible.
Kristen, you bring up a really good point that I think is important to really hit home, that nation states are collecting information and intelligence on civil society organizations, on journalists, and indeed on everyday citizens. So these actors, civil society, journalists, citizens, they're looking for more and more tools that they can use to protect themselves from these sorts of threats. And so I actually want to bring in Mike to this question. Given the unprecedented growth of sci-fi use in Russia for actors to protect themselves and the attempts to block it by the Russian government, what is your company doing in response to ensure that Russians continue to stay online and are able to access information in their context?
Sorry, is that for Mike?
For Mike, yes, please.
There we go. Okay. Hi. Yes. Now, so Russia is obviously front and center here. We could go back to August of 2020 when Belarus, the Lukashenko elections were contested. We saw a surge in use there as well. Sci-fi is basically the canary in the coal mine to tell you how rogue a government is going on their population, because depending on how extreme the filtering is that they put in, we get more people on our network. In the case of Russia, before the election, we were sitting at around 40,000 daily active users on our network, and within a week of the invasion, we were up to 1.1 million Russians a day. Our software is translated into 40 languages, so it's easy for people to take a word of mouth kind of ability to go get the software. But that said, we sharpened our we got our chops up in Iran and China over the last 14 years since Sci-Fi's been around, and we've moved along with the way the internet has changed, which is people are coming in with mobile devices and all the rest of that. Essentially, what we do is we make sure that our protocols are capable of evading standard filtering systems, and also when they do invade them, then it's a secure tunnel that is wrapped in a tunnel, so they can't even see anything. In terms of anything that's going over the line. So there's two aspects to protecting the person. One is to get them to actually connect, which is to provide Article 19, fundamental human right to everybody, which is electronic information regardless of where they are in the world. So we've been doing this for many years. We do it on Windows and Mac and iOS and Android. So we didn't really do anything different when the Russian people came to the plate, except make sure that we had servers that would work well for that region of the world. We took the surge on, and as I said, within a week we were 1.1 million. There was a play by the internet service providers in Russia, which was also actually telegraphed a year earlier when Rostelecom was ordered to start to implement deep packet inspection routers at all their spots, as well as other ISPs. This turning on the switch in Russia is a little bit different. You've got a world-class internet there. You've got people doing commerce, as we've heard about. Usually in Saifon's world, like we're helping Myanmar, we're helping Iran, we're helping even China, which is sort of in and out of the economic situation, depending on how it is. But mostly it's sort of already disenfranchised people. So this was quite a shock for the world to see this happen to, regularly commercially viable things suddenly went away in a day, and it caught everybody's attention. Now, we did see in the middle of March a major attack on VPN protocols in general, which brought down everybody. And we've been chipping away. We're now actually 1.3 million today. So yesterday we had 1.3 million Russians on our network. So we're able to, our system is designed to sort of automatically make adjustments to new attack vectors and that kind of thing. And that make it sound very easy, but it's extremely interesting, from a computer science point of view, adversarial environment to be able to get people to connect. Right now we're seeing a new surge in Russia as they're gearing up their DPI boxes. Their DPI boxes are picking up more and more VPNs and knocking them off as they go along. And of course, people are moving over to Saifon as that happens. So basically, we just do what we do. This is, I could go Cuba, Belarus, the latest surges. Sudan had a big one. Nobody really picked up on that one, but there was a giant surge there. Lots of stuff going on. What we do is just make sure that we have the capacity to take on these surges and design software that's able to provide it on demand. In the case of Belarus, it was basically a 4-week time period where the Belarusians really needed us, and then after that there was a capitulation. There's typically capitulation against Saifon because unlike the other VPN protocols, if you break Saifon, you kind of break your own internet in the process. So a lot of there's a very interesting interplay there of people constantly connecting. We learn about what connections work and don't work, and then at some point, when some tech guy calls up and says, hey, you want me to telnet into this machine so I can get it going? I can't, because you guys have blocked all the ports. And this turns out, so there's only so much authoritarian approach can take to this. Ultimately, it's a battle of the people against a small number of people. We typically find that when social media platforms in particular, and most importantly when communication platforms get blocked, that's when you see people pouring into Saifon because they just can't not have it. The Russia one, we're at 1.3 million today, but back at the end of 2018, we had 10.5 million people in Iran on our network when the Iranian government decided to block Telegram in one day. So this is, I guess the governments are going to learn over time that, it's going to kind of work for, I guess for them, it's a trade-off, right? Is it worth breaking their own internet, or is it not? So I think over time, we're going to see constantly governments making these decisions when they're sort of flailing. But as long as the people keep connecting, I think the message will be pretty clear to them that they should stop doing that.
Thanks, Mike. Kristen, I'd like to bring it back to Microsoft and how Microsoft responds when there are restrictions or limitations or blockages of different services in these sorts of contexts.
So our primary focus is in making sure that our products and services maintain accessibility for all and for all of our users around the world. So when we see an issue that is impacting our platform, then Microsoft's security and incident response teams get engaged to look at whether the issue is something that's impacting us on our network side that we can control, or if it's external to us, then can we share that information about that external attack activity with CISA in the United States, for example, the Department of Homeland Security or others who can help engage in response. That collective response and the community response is a really important part to that broader information sharing and ability to spot issues. So as far as how we play in the community space, obviously Microsoft will publish a lot of information about attacks and activity that we see, either through the Microsoft Security Response Center blog or our other security intelligence channels. Or of course, the fastest way to find out about what's going on from an attack perspective, Twitter. And so we are hyper connected at all times when we see attack activity that we can go do something about it.
Great, thank you. And how does Microsoft work to involve civil society organizations when these threats emerge, perhaps when they are specifically targeted? Is there an existing relationship, or there existing channels that civil society and companies like Microsoft can use to engage in these situations?
Sure. So whenever we see nation state or advanced attack activity against a civil society customer of ours, then we will notify them. If you're an enterprise customer, then a part of every Microsoft contract, there's a point of contact for who we will reach out to. And we will call that person or find a way to get in touch with them. And we are strongly convicted in the belief that when we do a notification like that, we have to provide actionable information so that you can go and look for the data of what happened and the evidence of the attack in your own systems. Over the past, I guess since about August of 2018, when we started doing these notifications, we've done over 60,000 of them to victims all around the world. And that number is only going to continue to go up over time, right? So from a civil society perspective, if you're in the cloud and you have a cloud service of ours, then being really clear who you told us is your point of contact will be really important, because when it matters, that's who we will call. And so having a primary email address, a backup email address, a primary phone number, a secondary phone number, those are all things that we will leverage. We know that on the individual account side in particular, nation states like to compromise email accounts and then enable mail forwarding. And so if you dive deep into your settings and you check mail forwarding on your personal accounts, if you see that that's checked, that's often a sign that you've been compromised by a nation state actor, right? So in those cases, we will force an automatic password reset, and you know, we'll provide notification to the customer, but you have to be careful that you are not allowing your account emails to be forwarded to a third party. So just from a personal hygiene perspective, that's something I always recommend people in the civil society space, just, you know, set a monthly calendar reminder to think about your own personal hygiene. Check the settings on your phone, check the settings on your email accounts, make sure that nobody has changed any settings. You know, even take a picture of your settings so you remind yourself of what your baseline is to help you identify when something has been manipulated.
Great. So keeping lines of communication clearly identified and open, and always going in to check your security settings and checking them regularly. That's what I'm hearing.
Correct.
Mike, I would like to pose the same question to you. How does Siphon engage civil society, and what do you recommend for civil society to do to protect itself in the face of these threats?
Well, on the civil society point of view, we are active in the internet freedom community that comes out of the USG funding, which is, by the way, super important, and the rest of the world should really wake up and start to participate in this and stop leaving it just to the US Congress to providing the internet freedom funds. But at least out of that little pitch there is there's a vibrant community. People are constantly in contact, and you know, for example, we have provided we have a version of the software which allows anybody to run their particular site unblocked and that kind of thing. But I think on the civil society point of view, I have to say we're part of it, but we are really about a scale solution to the problems that are here. We're not here to necessarily I mean, by definition, we solve all the individual problems, but each individual problem is of their own like. And so, for example, it's free to download Siphon. Everybody can get on it if they're part of if they have a contact anywhere, obviously. Oh, and by the way, we're running Siphon as fast as possible inside of Russia and inside of Ukraine and right now as part of our, thing. So there's no need for people to, purchase anything or to get faster service or any of that other stuff that is typical for parts of the world where people can pay. So that's one of the things that we do all the time, and open up that stuff. And again, that's come through some support through the USG funding on this stuff. And they're very proactive to make sure that these things are met and that the needs are met so that we can meet the scale problem. I think there's a limit. That's why I was calling out the rest of the countries in the world to step into this, because it's not really fair to there's G8, right? I don't know why the G1 has to do all the work of the G8 on this internet freedom issue. But bottom line is there'd be nobody in Russia connected to the internet right now if it wasn't for the Internet Freedom Program, because none of the commercial VPNs are working anymore, because none of them are designed to work in hostile environments. They're designed to get you on US Netflix. This is a fundamental difference in approach that Siphon has been afforded as a result of the forethinking of the internet freedom programs that are going on, of which Access Now is part, been active in, and the RightsCon comes out of. So, well done, everybody, in that sense. Here we are, able to parry the, actually provide viable service to people at a critical time. This is why you do it, and here it is working. So, in that sense, we're getting there. The real problem, of course, is education beyond people who are acutely aware of how to get around these things, and beyond the word of mouth. I can't necessarily imagine explaining to my mother how to get on the internet if Toronto suddenly was filtered. So these are some of the new bridges that need to be crossed in terms of getting into the population scale stuff. But that said, I mean, the one in Cuba was mind-boggling to me. We had 1.2 million people in Cuba on our network. I didn't even know there was 1.2 million people in Cuba that wanted to get on the network. So that was, I think we were probably at around 60–70% of the entire population was using our software. So I think that's where we're coming from anyway.
Thanks, Mike. And before we turn it over to the audience for questions and answers, I would like to quickly invite Anastasia to share her thoughts and experience. When civil society is under threat, how can these organizations and individuals get help?
Yes, thank you, Richard. I think at this point, I really need to mention our digital security helpline, which is available for users at risk all across the world. Available 24/7 in 9 languages. And as Christine mentioned, digital hygiene. We can help you with risk assessment, with checking your devices for vulnerabilities and malware, but also provide you tips how to secure communications on social media via email, and also how to secure file storage, for example. So please don't hesitate to contact us.
And how would folks go about getting in contact with you? How can they reach out?
Well, we have the special folder on our website and email, which we're happy to provide. As I told, the service is available 24/7, and also spread the word for our communities to know about this possibility.
Great, thank you for sharing that resource to our audience. I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to the audience for questions and answers. So please feel free to share your questions or thoughts or observations in the chat. Right now, we've got a question from Justin, and I'll go ahead and read that off for our panelists here, and you all can answer from your perspective. Justin asks, what legal measures can be taken against national, multinational, and state-sponsored corporations when they intentionally enable authoritarian transitions, military takeovers, and political instability? We have become dependent upon our tools, and access can be critical. but to what degree is the very corporate structure and legally mandated bottom line culpable and grabs for ever more concentrated power?
I think I can start, if I may.
Please.
Well, the recent Pegasus project revelations that we have already mentioned during our discussion have indeed demonstrated that as long as surveillance companies operate with no limitations and public oversight, no activist and journalist isn't safe from the authoritarian surveillance. Companies enabled authoritarian regimes to implement internet shutdowns, like US-Canadian firm Sandvine in Belarus. They, of course, sold its digital forensic technologies to the authoritarian regimes, including such firms as Celebrite, Kandiru, and so on. So what we need to do is, first of all, to call on governments to immediately place a moratorium on the sale, transfer, and the use of surveillance technology. And of course, we also recommend to adopt a sufficient legal framework requiring private surveillance companies and also their investors to conduct human rights due diligence and uphold transparency. Transparency reports can make a huge difference.
I would closely align with these comments. I agree very strongly, but I would also encourage civil society to continue to raise concerns about the fact that governments are addressing these issues through the very closed door, very opaque export control process. And so the regulation of security and surveillance technology through export control means that most of us don't get to see and understand the detail of what governments are agreeing to before it then has to get implemented at the national level. So taking surveillance technology and making it a national conversation, taking the moratorium that Anastasia is calling for and having that become a part of the broader public debate about how should these tools be used, if at all, in a civil society is a really important issue that does not get enough attention. And so I think that the civil society community was critical when we were fighting the Boston, our original rules in export control. And it was a great collaboration between the private sector and civil society to go put pressure on government to change some of this. I think we need to keep that pressure up because it's an area where it's just really hard to gain insight when the export control process is not the same as a transparent notice of proposed rulemaking or comment period that allows us to have a broad public debate.
So Kristen, Anastasia, from what I'm hearing from both of you, it sounds like this debate, this issue doesn't just reside in authoritarian regimes or conflict impacted areas. These conversations need to be taking place in more open, democratic or developed countries where these softwares and hardwares are being exported from.
Yes, exactly. Because we can't simply say do not sell to Belarus and close eyes on all other violations and deals that are happening. Besides, of course, sometimes when we name and shame certain companies, they indeed decide to cease their relationship with certain regimes. But at the same time, all the equipment that have already been sent and delivered to these governments are still in place and still in use. So like we solved the problems on words and public statements, but not in an essence.
Great, thank you. Another question we have from the audience is regarding data. The question reads, how long should data live? If we cannot be forgotten, our data could change hands to parties we wouldn't want. Yet if everyone's data expires, historical records could be difficult. Would anybody like to respond to this question?
I think this is a great question because at least from a nation state perspective, right? I'm not a specialist in the human rights space. And so I do not have the history of the ramifications of those issues. But if I come at this from a nation state and cybersecurity perspective, you can't look further than SolarWinds for a great articulation of how long you think about attack activity. SolarWinds was compromised. And then at some point, the Nobelium, the Russian attackers, launched their software update that went out to 18,000 victims. And so then in February, March, April timeframe of 2021, that started to get installed on SolarWinds customers. The attack activity was detected in late November, early December of 2020. Sorry, I'm off by a year. You have to forgive me. The pandemic means I forget all my my years. But the broader point is, we went from April until December of 2020 before that activity was uncovered, and victims being notified and really finding the depth of that attack in December and January of 2021. So at that point, if you are going back over your data, if you don't have 18 months worth of logs, it will be impossible for you to find out, when did that initial compromise occur? How did the attacker move on your network? Did they move laterally? Did they exfiltrate information? And so the retention of that information is really, really critical. Nation states are, there's a reason why they're called advanced persistent threats. They are happy to sit on a network for a long period of time and observe, collect information, and remain dormant in order to be able to then go activate an attack in the future. And so the ability to have at least 1, if not 2 years worth of forensic data becomes essential. Otherwise, it's like trying to figure out where somebody walked after it snowed, not only once, but twice. And that becomes a real challenge. So from a human rights perspective, there may be opinions on this that I am not savvy enough to know, but from a security incident response and forensic perspective, that's just a recent example that's worth keeping in mind.
Yeah, let me step in this discussion. Well, it's really interesting to hear your perspective, Christine, really. But let me raise some red flags here. Since 2014, when the right to be forgotten has been developed, in fact, we have witnessed how governments, especially authoritarian governments around the world, have misinterpreted and misimplemented this right in a way that significantly harms human rights and leads to more censorship. With this in mind, we actually do not call governments to further develop this right to be forgotten, but instead to focus on developing and reforming comprehensive data protection laws. And from this fair balance of freedom of expression, we think that under no circumstances must the right to be forgotten be applied in a way to enable removal of online content, because indeed it will be used by the authoritarian regimes in a very, very bad way.
We've got one final question from our audience. And given that we only have a few minutes left, please keep your responses in the shortness of a tweet, 140 characters or less. What's your advice for human rights advocates to persuade companies to open channels that will be crucial during crises? And how do activists get past company gatekeepers?
Well, to be brief, I guess this is the concerns that need to be addressed to companies themselves. They need to be open to this dialogue, and we call on them to open these communication channels with civil society, because those on the ground are the only ones who are aware of context and content, that what's going on. So yeah, this is up to companies.
My tweet size response would be, it would be amazing if we could see the civil society community create an ISAC. every critical infrastructure has its own information sharing and analysis center where all the key companies or key participants get together and exchange information, and then they get power of force to be able to get a seat at the table with the Department of Homeland Security, CISA, and other major sectors. I think that it would be an incredibly powerful thing for civil society to come together as an information sharing and analysis center and start having a larger seat at the table from an incident response perspective, because then you get response at scale, which helps provide greater resources and collaboration at scale. And that's something I think would be really exciting for the community.
Yeah, I guess the one thing I would add from the SAFON side of this, it would be that you know, we have to recognize that most of the stuff that's getting blocked is Western technology. Okay, so we should keep our eye on that and work within those people, those groups that are getting you know, knocked out by this. When Russia blocked Instagram, 80 million people were knocked off of Instagram. This is something that you know, is caught people's eye, so to speak. So let's, you know, understand that when these attacks are happening, they're actually happening against Western technology. I'm not really necessarily like, just, I think it's something to take forward. We kind of take it for granted. We think, oh, Facebook's going to work forever, Microsoft's going to work forever, Instagram's going to work forever, all these things are going to work forever. Meanwhile, they're literally getting attacked by every authoritarian government there is. You know, none of these things can get off the ground in certain countries as a result of it. So, you know, let's keep that in mind, okay? When we're doing this, we're you know, they're not blocking TikTok. So.
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time today. I would like to thank our panelists for joining us for this important and timely discussion on how civil society and the private sector can partner to address some of these dynamic challenges that we face in times of conflict and authoritarianism. Thank you to all of our participants for joining us. We hope it was a productive call and that you left with some good recommendations on how you as civil society can best protect yourself. And thank you to RightsCon and Access Now for bringing us together.
Thanks.
Thank you,
everyone.
Richard. Thank you.